Hello, Alex here, and welcome to another Q&A. Now, this is where I just go through the mostly YouTube comments here. I have other comments, but I didn't clip them into a document, so I'm just going to open up YouTube Studio, which appears to be working right now. Every time I've gone to do one of these Q&As in the last few weeks, because I kind of skipped one, YouTube Studio hasn't been working, so whatever. It's working now. Working. So I'm going to read through that, answer the questions for you. So if you've asked anything in the comments of any of the videos in the last few days, past, present, or whatever, hopefully I can get to them here. I'm going to go back a few weeks worth of questions, but there appear to be 72 I haven't gotten to, so we'll see. As always, I will provide timestamps in the video description below so you can navigate this video and click around to skip the questions you're not interested in, that type of thing. Let me take care of like current events and news and upcoming and that type of thing. As I've mentioned before, the next live stream, which is going to be now in August, I'm not sure exactly the date. I'm waiting for some parts to come in. Aren't I always waiting for some parts to come in? They're supposed to come in next week or halfway through the week after. We shall see if that happens. But we're going to start the Pimp My Ender type series, kicking it off with a live stream. I'll announce the date, like I said, as soon as I get the parts and I can figure out all that stuff. So if you have any ideas for what you would like to see with that inaugural live stream, let me know in the comments. The tentative plans are just to do a live assembly of the printer and like a little bit of Q&A and those types of things. Do some like run some prints in the background and, you know, dink around, see what settings are in the firmware and that sort of thing. But the Ender 3 is a very well-trod printer, and that was supplied by one of my supporters who was like, hey, this is a pretty cool printer. Everyone has one. I think you should have one. Maybe you could do some videos on it, that type of thing. So I am going to do that and use that as a reference platform for various things, you know, for the masses. Because as you've seen, what I do 90% of my printing on are printers that I designed and built myself. And that's cool, but it's not necessarily helpful to, like, you know, the plebs out there. I shouldn't say that. Just the entry-level people who, like, you know, grabbed the Ender because it was a great deal. So that'll help it be a little bit more relatable to folks. And then I'm going to do, in order to, as I have done with other video series, weave in and out different, like, theory videos and commentary and reviews on parts and things like that. I'm going to use the Ender as a platform in that series to say, like, okay, well, now let's look at these 32-bit upgrade boards, or look at this touchscreen, or let's look at this inductive probe, or things like that. Stick it on there. So we'll see how many of the parts that I've accumulated in the last like month or two I can work into that series with that printer, and that'll all be coming up after that live stream stuff. I have on order still the new Trinamic's TMC3209s. I have a couple of those coming. They haven't arrived yet. Within the next like 7 to 10 days, they're supposed to be here, according to AliExpress. I already have the TMC51XX series, or the 50 whatever XX series, the SPI ones. Those are already here. They're plugged into my the last live stream DIY printer that I still haven't finished that series on, but that got shoved onto the back burner for all these other reasons. And I will be, like I keep promising, and they keep putting out new drivers, I will do sometime in that period a new torque test video with the new drivers and the old drivers and the new firmwares and the new firmware options and that sort of thing. Had Scott from Marlin comment on the old torque video, saying Marlin 2's changed a lot, the Trinamics library has changed a lot, and that's true. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do the revised one with more granular and wider options. Other people have asked questions underneath the Silent Septic torque video about noise and things like that. That was something that I wanted to compare. If you watched that video, I threw together a prony break real quick to do the torque with just like a kitchen scale. And the reason I did it that way was so if somebody wanted to do a more refined version of that at home, you could do that yourself. But this time I wanted to make a better, more accurate, more repeatable type of a test setup that was also quiet, so I could test the noise in terms of like regular steppers at like 16 microstepping, you know, 32, 64, 128, all those types, as well as like the Trinamics at like interpolated and native stepping, stealth chop and spread cycle and all those types of options. So those will be included in the next torque test thing. They just got to stop putting out new drivers before I have a chance to finish my setup. So that's upcoming. As far as the new 32-bit boards, I actually reached out to a couple manufacturers about those because this is a good thing. It's a bad thing for planning my channel finances, but it's a good thing for people involved in 3D printing. New 32-bit boards, there was kind of an explosion this summer, and I anticipate this being a thing that continues, especially now that someone's sort of like broken through that wall and like bit the bullet and put out super cheap like 32-bit like boards, STM32 stuff. Some of them have onboard Trinamic drivers, some of them are socketed so you can bring your own drivers or whatever you prefer. But like I said in the last, you know, the STM32 Invasion video, they're super cheap, starting at like 15 bucks and then going up to like 30 something or 20 something for ones with integrated Trinamics drivers, like next generation stuff. So that's great. I have not yet checked, well, not within the last few weeks, on where Marlin's STM32 support lies. I know, and these were some of the people that asked questions underneath that video, like what comes on board those boards. But they have a preloaded firmware that is a Marlin derivative. It's not refined, it's theirs, and you can go to their GitHub or their webpage and download it. But anyway, the boards that I have or have coming are obviously the rearms. I have those. I have two of the big TrueTech SKR minis. I have an SKR... I either have an SKR Pro or an SKR DIP, the socketed large version one. Either one of those are both coming. I have from well, I won't mention his name because I don't know if he wants me to or not, but yeah, whatever, from Mike, because there's a million Mikes in the world. So Mike, you know who you are, and other people, you don't know which Mike I'm talking about. But Mike is supplying a Cheetah board for me to test. That's a Fizzetic, their version of the cheapy 32-bit integrated stuff. I can't remember if that has STM32 on it or LPC processor, but we'll find out. I also have the SKR Mini E3 Ender 3 specific mini board with the built-in Trinamic drivers coming. As well as their touchscreen for that, so I can test how their touchscreen works, how the regular RepRap panel works, and how that works with the Ender's built-in panel. So we get to see how that works, and I can do that with the Cheetah as well and some of those other boards, see how well they, you know, cross-pollinate. As well as if you're into the 8-bit stuff still, or the rearms type stuff, and you want to keep your old ecosystem, I do have the Ramps 1.6 Plus video that still has to come. Again, like I said, that's in the live stream printer that's been buried for a little bit, but I will get to that. That's not a difficult video to do. I just have to get around to doing it. And many, many more things, but I'll stop talking about that right now. So, from that on to some non-3D printer related stuff that's going to be coming up. I did say a few weeks ago I was going to start posting some of those, you know, fun videos, fun for me videos that I recorded a little while ago. I actually have had so little time that I couldn't even sit down and edit the already recorded videos. But while I am in my not having time, I am videotaping my not having time, what I'm doing here, and those will become new videos. So there will be plenty of stuff going on, and we are in kind of the YouTube lull, doldrums of summer type thing. Oops, and I have a message. I will turn my volume down. Let's get now... Oh, wait a minute. No, one more thing before we get to the questions. It is Amazon Prime Day, or days, whatever. One of the things that I did in this last few weeks, one of my tasks for myself, was to sign up specifically for Amazon associate accounts in several different countries. So I just took the countries that were the easiest to sign up for and that I had the most viewers from. So now I have affiliate links that I will post in my videos from here on out, and I'll post in the bottom of these for not just USA, but also specifically Canada, because that, I don't know how that really works, but I did go through and do the specific Canada one. So that's their UK and Germany. So those were the big ones. Next biggest are like France and Australia and Netherlands and that type of thing. But some of those were a little bit more difficult to sign up for. At least it didn't work at the time, and it's complicated enough with those four. So as I will have the general links posted at the bottom of each video. As far as like the products links, they have some other like one-click service that lets you parse that into all the different locales, but it doesn't seem to work on YouTube for some reason. So we'll see. But anyhow, that just means that if you're in one of those countries, which comprises about 50% of my viewers, in addition to like America, that will encompass like 75% of the viewers, now you can use that affiliate link to when you go to Amazon to do stuff, or when you buy things that are in my video, and they kick me back a couple percent. Keep the video channel alive. Okay, now on to the questions. Let's start with Chloe McCloey asks, under the Trinamic silent step stick torque curve testing how-to video, what about noise? 12 versus 24. I have an issue with my TMC32 IDE in my printer versus 12 volts. Only on the y-axis, and it vibrates the belt a ton and makes a really ear-piercing noise. Using a belt spring helps, but everyone screams at me for using it every time I mention it. Yeah, all right, Chloe. So I actually have a similar issue with one of the printers I have here, where it just happens to hit the resonant frequency that excites the bed sled itself and makes it brrr, which is super annoying. All right, let me back this up. You say ear-piercing noise, so I'm going to assume that's maybe not a rattle, but maybe it's a whine. I'm not sure. I'll cover both real quick. If it's a whine, what happens is you have your internal chopper within your driver chips, and that will dynamically change its frequency depending on what is required, which is both the conditions it's operating under, i.e. what you set it to, and what you surround it with, as in your kinematics and your electronics. Excuse me. So if you're talking about that type of whine, it might be that and I think I mentioned this in one of the other videos where I talked about those different parameters, but depending on your motor's inductance and resistance, how much voltage headroom you have, because of that. Sorry, I'm on a lot of coffee right now. You may or may not get whine, and it's your margin of error between whine and not whine shrinks as your voltage headroom gets lower. So if you go up to 24, you're less likely to whine because of that. Also, your chopper settings and all that stuff. I don't know what version of Marlin you're running, or if you're running Marlin at all, or what your motors are and that type of thing, but all of those relate into it. Now, the recent settings with Marlin 2 in particular are actually very close to the settings that I used to put in the Trinamic like TMC advanced options to shut my motor whine up on the couple that were a pain in the butt. So if you're using software control of your Trinamic drivers and a more recent version, and an old version of Marlin, try using a more recent version of Marlin, and it might just fix it, because their settings are better now than back when these things first started and they were still tweaking things in. Otherwise, you can try popping it up to 24 volts if you want to do the cheapy quick fix, see if it works. Just get one of those little, no, I don't think I have one within reach. Just the little switching boost boards. And you can use that to temporarily just boost the voltage to, your motors and see if it makes the whine stop. Otherwise, you're tweaking settings. Another thing is, and I can't remember, I know I started filming this video, I don't remember if I ever finished it or not, but this was for the TMC2130s, but it applies across the board. There were a couple of the clones that had really goofy jumper settings on when you ran them in standalone mode. So if you're talking about standalone mode and you're using a clone, they may have really goofy settings for like the chopper and the I forget off the top of my head what the other options are. The different The threshold and the blanking and those types of things, which all relate to the frequency of your chopper. And it was virtually impossible to get some of those clones to stop whining with certain motors. So I don't know if that's the issue you're talking about either. If you're talking about like a mechanical resonance, then that's a different issue altogether. I would need more details to be able to get into that. Okay, next, let's get to, under TMC2209 and STM32-bit board invasion, Kevin Quinn says, lots of info on the SKR Mini E3 on their GitHub. No schematics yet. They do it for other boards. Time will tell. A couple quick things that you mentioned from the manual that I revised, last revised a few days ago. Okay, so this is current news. The 5-volt spread ground is hard selecting spread cycle or stealth chop, presumably instead of using the UART feature. That's interesting. I wonder if that's switchable. I guess I'll find out when I eventually get those stupid drivers. RGB is for RGB LED strip. Very important, obviously. Yes, very important, LEDs. Firmware is uploaded by placing the firmware.bin onto the SD card. That's interesting because I think I mentioned in a previous video I made that option of the firmware for myself, and I couldn't get it down low enough to fit within the progmem space on the smaller STM32s. I wonder if they have a copy of their bootloader code up anywhere. I'll have to check because I'd be interested to see how they do that. It theoretically should be fairly simple. You just the STM32s have a bootloader permanently burnt onto the silicone that you can't screw up. So there's no way you can possibly brick these unless you hit them with a brick. But you can always go to that bootloader, and that will work with you have access to like the USB and UART and all things like that. From there, you can go to your volatile storage space and bootstrap a secondary. Well, this would be non-volatile, like burnt into your on-chip memory. A secondary bootloader that you bootstrap off of that, worst case scenario, it jumps to a particular place in your memory where you say whatever register you tell it to jump to, or memory address you tell it to jump to. And then it'll run that binary, which can be a program that checks your SD card every time you turn it on to see if there's an updated new bin file there, in which case it takes that, loads it into prog memory, reloads it again, and then you have updated your firmware, or done whatever other thing, injected a virus into your printer, whatever it is that you were running in that binary. And last thing he says, they've also released a version of the step stick. Seems an odd choice for the Ender 3. Oh, I'll have to... Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that. Yeah, the SKR E3 dip. I think I do have that board coming out. So, yeah, Kevin, I will be evaluating that board, if that is the one that's coming. I'm 90% sure. I don't know when, though. It's coming from China, and literally... put those emails out like yesterday, so we'll see. Mike M says under the STM32, the Big Tree SKR Mini E3 Marlin's already installed on the board and it's ready to use right out of the box. Oh, he is Marlin already installed and used right out of the box. I don't with an Ender 3. I don't have an Ender 3 to see if that's true. I know Marlin is on there because I don't know if I did this in a video or if it was like a chat or something like that, but I pulled one of these out of the box and just plugged it right into my USB port, fired up Pronterface, and did like a 500 to see what the EEPROM settings were, and it did give me like common responses and reasonable setups for something like in Ender, but I'll have to wait until I get that together to see exactly what's going on. Or do I need to use a bootloader to compile Marlin? I've been reading people having problems compiling Marlin on their SKR board. I'm new to 3D printing, thank you. Yeah, that's probably just because of the messiness of the STM32 libraries. I know the Marlin team's working on that. Other people that are just open source folk are working on that. And there is some messiness with a few of these, the background things. They're using now platform I/O for this. So that pulls in the background libraries from different repos. There's some real simple header namespace collisions that can be solved. I put my like quick fix for that up on the like Marlin GitHub to see if anybody can pick up on that. There's some of the code base that they were using for that platform in PIO was from the old STM32 Duino project. That's a little bit outdated now, and there's a few different versions floating around, so that's a mess. It will all be sorted out now that these boards are out in the wild, and people are going to start, like, you know, pitchforks and torches if they can't get Marlin to compile. I think some of the people that are upkeepers of those non-Marlin libraries are going to get those fixed as well, and there are patches in the works, and the patches that everyone who's been working with these chips for the last few years have been doing manually themselves. Honestly, what got me out of it was that platform I/O and their smart search thing is so like rapacious about its searching, and has a lot of the like verifying like versions of library and things like that, that it was difficult for me to use like local copies of a library, hack it until it was working, and then have PIO pull that into the compile part to be able to test that, and then offer that as like a you know, a push on one of the repos, or you know, suggest as a bug fix or something like that, because it would keep overwriting the libraries or pulling in the non-patched ones, and had to go through all kinds of song and dance to get it to ignore those, which was great. Then they changed the way that they pulled from remote repos, because I was like, okay, well, if that's the way you're going to be, I'll make repos of these experimental things, like upload it to like a, you know, a secret GitHub thing, and then just edit the stupid Python file and the what do you call it, the INI, to pull in from my particular hidden repos, just so I can have that to test out the options. Just a nightmare compared to working with the Arduino IDE, but the Arduino IDE is very limited and not as well optimized in their compiler and things like that. It also doesn't pull in anything that's not, well, you know, Arduino based. So platform I/O gives you much more opportunity. It is very actively maintained, but some of the things that they have a real boner for doing, a lot of that like automatic pull in and automagical stuff, doesn't really work. And I've complained about it on PIO a few times, and they have a bad habit of deleting critical comments underneath their stuff. So yeah, I don't like that very much. Anyways, that's all to say that like it'll get better in the future. Okay, also under the STM32 TMC2209, Luca Capelli says, "Hi Alex, interesting video as usual. I have two questions. The new 2209, except for the DC step feature, looks better than the TMC2130 because of Stealth Chop version 2 and StallGuard version 4. Do you think it will take the place of the old TMC2130 in the new future?" Take the place of? Maybe. It seems like an all-around better chip. It's a new iteration. Well, flapping paper towels around. It's a new iteration on the UART series, not the SPI series. But I've always kind of preferred the UART series, and I have to check this when my drivers come, but I think they have the serial UART feature built in, which is very nice, as opposed to the parallel like SPI and UART on the other ones, because it'll save a whole lot of freaking pins on your board. And if that's the case, and you could just have like 2 pins that control like any number of stepper motors on your board, yeah, I think that's probably a good enough feature in and of itself that it's going to replace it to the 2130s. Plus the SPI, because of the goofiness with like the full graphics displays, until those go the way of the dodo, and SD cards and other things on the SPI bus work, because of the goofiness of that, with making connection errors with the TMC 2130s, as well as the problem of having the wiring harnesses on those stupid LCDs laid out wrong if you're talking about like emissions, them supplying unshielded ribbon cables and getting all kinds of like connection problems with those. Yeah, I think it's easier to just go with like the serial stuff, particularly if you can just human centipede. That's a terrible way of describing it. If you could daisy chain them all together instead of doing parallel. So yeah. I don't know if it's going to replace them, but I think it's a good choice going forward. STM32 is for sure better than the Atmega 5620, but how about the ESP32? It should have more or less the same price. For what I'm reading it online, it has better performance than STM32. Yeah, ESP32 is another platform that I've been watching. Generally, those are made for Internet of Things type stuff and things and junk. Generally, ESP32 are Internet of Things devices, and they have very little in terms of I/O. They don't have the like professional. They don't have a lot of the bus features and some of the advanced stuff that STM32 does, but that's just because the demand wasn't there. It was meant for a different genre of things. Perfectly feasible to make a 3D printer out of that if you get the I/O nailed, which means if we had DMA support in the firmware and you could tap into that with a DMA I/O expander on ESP32 that was pretty quick, like quick enough to keep up with the new stuff, I don't see why not. When you're talking about the different firmwares, let's talk about like Klipper doesn't really care which chip it is, as long as you're just spitting out the assignments. Some other firmwares, like it doesn't give a crap what family it is as long as you assign it to the right pin. And with Marlin, you have a hardware abstraction layer for like each family, and then you can just do whatever. So theoretically, when all this stuff eventually gets worked on in the future, sky's the limit in terms of what family. You just have to have somebody to take the effort to make the HAL. But I think the sticking point with a lot of these is going to be the UI library. If they get a unified UI, that'll be great, that everyone has to follow, but we're used to using the cheap rip-rap discounts and things like that. But when you get to like the GLCDs that work off the U8G library, there's now in Marlin 2 like their abstracted interim step. Instead of going with the U8G lib 2, it's like abstracted from 1 in their own thing, and you have to write it for each driver version of each HAL that's on each board, and I don't like that at all. But that's kind of a sticking point with these. But in terms of everything else, you just need to get the HAL situated, and then you can plug in whatever you want, as long as it's supported by Platform I/O, which is virtually everything. Certainly ESP32. Yes, Brooks McLaughlin asked under the ramp series, so if I connect a 2-pin end stop to the wrong 2 pins, did I fry to my board? Yeah, I responded to this, but I thought I would mention it because I've seen this a couple times. It's easy and hard to smoke your MCU with end stops. The signal pin is hooked directly to an I/O pin of your MCU. So if you do anything goofy to that signal pin, you're going to fry your MCU. But there are a couple different ways you can plug it in wrong. You can plug it this way, that way, or upside down, this way or that way. And depending on what your board is, I am assuming this is a ramps, you have like you know, your 3 pins, your plus, your signal, and your ground, that type of thing. Grounds are all tied together. Ground is ground. Plus is tied to those individual filter capacitors on the end stops, which is going to be feeding it with your logic voltage. So if you plug it in the one way, you're sticking voltage onto your MCU pin, and you could fry it if it's powered up. That's not good. If you plug it in the other way, you're just making a dead short between your B+, yeah, I've been working with vacuum tubes, so B+, your V+, your voltage rail, and your ground. So hopefully your fuses or polyfuses or your power supply protection would kick in before your anything like your capacitors fry themselves, but probably not. So it is possible. First thing to check would be unplug everything, see if the board powers up. Second thing would be, with everything unplugged, stick it in your USB, see if you have any communication with it. If not, your microcontroller might be fried. So those are the 2 things you might fry, your microcontroller or some part of your power supply. Parts of your power supply, that's fixable. You can always replace capacitors, you can replace diodes, you can replace polyfuses. If you pop your microcontroller, just toss it and get another mega board. On the Omron failing mouse switch part 2, order says, fun fact, just purchased the glorious Model O, and it has a debounce timer inside the software so you can increase it if the mouse starts to double click. Nice. They're not fixing the problem, but at least they're acknowledging it and giving the user some options. Yeah, I've seen a couple different options. I know that I just personally moved to, well, that's a different story. I moved to Logitech's new, what is this called here? The Game Hub, Game G-Hub, whatever. But it is nice that they're trying to fix it. The problem is, like I have, let me see if I can unplug this. Even right now I'm using a G502. This is the first version. The second version with the Hero sensor, I haven't been inside it, but I suspect they use the same one as they used with the light speed stuff. And when you're moving to when they're trying to do low power draw as well as the wireless connection, they're moving to pumping even less power into the switches in terms of like voltage and current. So that's why you're having them fail even more. And so it used to be like, avoid the wireless ones and you'll be a little more okay-ish, but now it's, since I suspect they're using that same, you know, Hero sensor on the light speed and the wired ones with the same logic level and the same current levels, that you're going to have just as much failing with the wired versions, which a consumer would say is lazy and cheesy, but a shareholder would say that's a way to economize your circuits and use it in 2 different product lines. But let me see. Phil M says, under the TMC3209 and STM32, make it do Klipper. I will be doing some Klipper versions in the future. My first Klipper video will probably be a part of the Ender 3 series, so I can just, because you kind of need a way into those, I don't want to call, like, you know, fringe type of things, but if I just put up a video that's like, hey, here's intro to Klipper, you have people who know what Klipper is that'll click on that and check it out. But if I say alternative firmwares for the Ender 3, then anyone who's looking for either Klipper or alternative firmwares for the Ender 3 is going to have that video as a resource. So that will be upcoming. Let me see. Under the silent septic torque testing, holy bleep, you deserve an award for doing all that work. Oh, wait till you see the silent step, or wait till you see the torque test version 2. I got myself some Trinamic drivers, and this is super helpful. I really need to get the vibrations down to zilch while being as fast as balls. Balls are pretty fast. So the higher voltage seems to make sort of sense. Yeah, if you're trying to get quieter, smoother, all that stuff, and faster, raise your voltage. Running on 8 volts. 8 volts. Do you mean 8 volts above the voltage drop from the motor? Because just 8 volts total on your voltage plus, that's real low. Yeah, get that up. Get that up as high as you can. Let me see. Oh, live stream custom design discussion. This was from the live stream video where I was going through the wacky firmware, advanced firmware options for Marlin. Oh, wow, I'm going to screw this. Emariki Maru says, I had the same issue with S-Curve and Stealth Chop, but it worked nicely in Spread Cycle. Yeah, that was something I mentioned before, and those were LPC HAL specific issues that I don't know if they're fixed yet. That was somebody else mentioned under my my rearm video that I never did the part 2 nerdy details one. It's because I was giving like the Marlin guys a chance to catch up with the LPC bugs that have been there for like 2.5 years now, where if you have a couple different options, like advanced options like, you know, linear acceleration plus S-Curve plus, you know, Stealth Chop together, it would do like print over 1 tick each level, so you had this like ever so slight leaning Tower of Pisa effect on all your prints, which I mentioned this in a live stream, I think forced me to tear one of my printers apart twice because I kept thinking it had to be one of the belts catching up on something. Ends up, no, it was just the advanced options with the LPC HAL. For some reason, makes a leaning Tower of Pisa. I'm not super into the LPC stuff, so I didn't bother diving into it and trying to fix it. But I did hold off on doing the second part of that for like 5 months now, I guess, hoping that will be fixed, and then I can go back and say, hey, I had this problem with this, but it's fixed now, so let me show you the details about it, rather than saying, this is broken, but these would be the details about it if it worked, you know, so that's the kind of things that holds up those advanced videos. Farouk Korea says, hi Alex, great to always see your videos. Once again, I need your help. I bought an SKR 1.3 and I need to run it at 12 volts and power the drivers at 24 volts. Can you help me? I briefly mentioned that, or I briefly said something about that, but I did mention that Thomas Solanderer, Thomas, did a video specifically about that stuff on his channel, so I'm not going to reiterate that. Just go over to his channel and look at the run different voltages with different blah 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 yada yada. Basically, things running at different voltages, as long as it's not like a logic voltage difference, if you're just talking about power difference, it doesn't care unless it's a logic voltage going out from a power rail that's higher and relative to that power rail because it's not regulated for whatever reason, and then you pop what it's running into. But we don't have to worry about that, I don't think, except for maybe the TMC2209s where I saw they have an onboard regulated output for the logic voltage, which is weird to me, and I'll have to check that out when those chips get here, which is taken forever. Anyway, I've been reading some data sheets, can you tell? But if you're just talking about the operating voltage of something that's unrelated from like the logic stuff, as in just powering the drivers that just power your motor, you could run them at whatever voltage you choose. You could have 5 different power supplies in there, or you can step one power supply down to another one, or you can step power supplies up to other voltages, that type of thing. So it's tough to say like, yeah, just do X, Y, and Z, and then you got the whole thing nailed, because it's best to run whatever you have. Well, you have to say what's drawing the most current, and that's probably going to be your core operating voltage. So if you have a lot of 12-volt peripherals that are drawing several amps, then you work off a 12-amp supply rather than taking a 24 and dropping it down to 12, because then you're tossing away a lot of waste heat that you don't need to do, as well as making your life harder. So yeah, in that case, you would step your 12 up to 24, probably using little, you know, step-up DC supplies. Farouk had asked specifically about voltage references in terms of, like, the capacitors. Now, each of those step drivers has... let me grab the closest board. Do I have a board that doesn't have a thing on it? Okay, here's a rat's nest. You see, each of those has its own filter cap. That needs to be as close to that power pin and that motor's ground as possible. And if I were designing the board, I would go so far as to bypass it with a high-frequency cap, but, you know, whatever. So that filter cap should be referenced to your driver's ground and your driver's VM, or whatever they want to call it, VM, V+, whatever they silkscreen the name of your supply voltage on there, as close as possible to the board. Rob Fuzzy, underneath the silent step stick torque testing video, says, I'm gonna need units on the chart axes, my dude. They're normalized, Rob. Sorry. I just did that for cleanliness reasons, but I normalized everything to 1. Liviskill 47 says, I see the NXP ARM controller firmware can be read and download using Platform IO on Visual Studio. Is the same for STM32 baseboard, or does it need specific ST Micro IDE to play with the firmware? You can do everything through Platform IO and Visual Studio. The only caveat to that would be the USB drivers. Now, it depends, and I'm going to have to see this when these boards deliver. It depends how they decided to handle the USB. I know that it looks like this, this Big Tree Tech board, it looks like they're using the onboard USB driver, because STM32 chips have a USB driver built in. It looks like, excuse me, Physetic, they used a separate CH340 driver, which I don't know why they did that. And then you could always use like a little Atmel driver like they do on the Mega or things like that. It makes the most sense to use the driver that's on the STM32 chip. The problem is the driver for your driver. So the options are like You can download a third-party driver like you have to with the CH340s on Windows, where you have the separate driver that goes in for that. That's a big pain in the butt with driver signing because Microsoft is bad at security. There's also a couple different ways of getting it into the stock driver. You can use DFU or DFuse or like any version of that. It's an open source standard. It's available on 10 different platforms, and I've personally gotten that to run on Mac OS, Linux, and Windows 7 and 10. Works better in 7 than 10, again, because of driver signing. Works better in older versions of... well, no, not really. I had to roll my own version in Mac OS because it was the precompiled version didn't work at all, and the Linux version works fine. But yeah, it's really going to depend on how easy they make it to access which drivers they use for the board, and I will see that when those boards come in, and it'll be a part of the review. And I will try to install those drivers and upload firmware updates right before your very eyes on video. Ooh. RD Teramir says under the my random fails and lessons learned video. On the subject of random fails, Big Tree Tech, you mentioned them on the channel a lot. Yeah, they seem to be making the most moves, so they're going to get attention until somebody else starts making moves. A few years ago, I bought 3 2004 rep discount smart control clones. Besides the wiring being reversed, yeah, some of those wiring was reversed because they went with certain boards that used a reverse wiring harness, which was goofy. You look at their smart adapter versus the real thing and you'll see it. Yeah, it's a pain in the butt because I have some of those old adapters and I have some of the regular ones. The biggest problem is current draw. Ooh, this is going to get good. Yes, I see where you're going with this. I had to remove the voltage controller and solder in a new one that worked because it was burning hot. Yup. And I had to swap that for a DC-DC converter. Yup. Mini 360. I'm going to have to look up Mini 360 because I'm not sure which one you're referring to. I will have to add another diode before it'll be ready for 24 to 26. Yeah, because of the absolute max of 23 recommended. Yeah, that's super dumb. That happened on a couple of those boards from different vendors, and a lot of the that was an Arduino fail as well. Their onboard regulator tends to pop when you use those. Like the full graphics displays, sometimes depending on which buzzer they used and which backlight they used and which limiting resistor, if any, they used on them, like it would work fine right up until the first time you push a button, in which case the buzzer flips on, and if they used a speaker instead of a piezo buzzer, it would draw too much current that would suck too much through the 5-volt rail, that would suck too much through the 12-volt rail through the regular, and it would just pop, like blow immediately. That's all a nightmare. Hopefully we've all learned from that and we'll move on to better stuff in the future. But I do have, like I said, I do have a couple at least of these E3 minis that I can torture test the DC switching circuits and see how gracefully they fail. We can explore their failure modes together and see how much current they can handle. Oh, wow. This is from several years ago. Modeling guitar pickups in FEMM, Part 1. How do you calculate aligned inductance for switched reluctance motor phase winding in FEMM? I'm not sure what you mean by aligned inductance. If you just want to know about the inductance of the coil itself, I wouldn't use FEMM to do that. I just use FEMM to model fields. You can kind of guesstimate that with hand math. I know FEMM is a 2D modeler, which is a problem. All the 3D modelers cost monies. And I don't have access to any of those. I haven't tried them. So if I have to guesstimate inductance, that gets wacky when you're talking about multi-layer inductors. If you're talking about single-layer inductors, I mean single-turn inductors, obviously you can do that on a piece of paper. If you're talking about multi-layer, no, I said that wrong. If you're talking about levels, layers, okay. If you have a single-layer inductor, that's pretty easy to calculate. There's lots of tools online, just little JavaScript calculators. Multi-layer is where it gets a little bit more complicated because not only do you have the loop inductance and the additional inductance from the permeability of the core material, but you also have the inductance from loop to loop. Then you have it moving in several directions along with the loop and the core. That's where you get into like the 3D modelers can do that, but FEMM can't. So I guess you could do it in 2D and then extrapolate that across, but I wouldn't. I would use a tool specifically for that. Terry Pullen says, I'm going to hire a psychiatrist and tell him that I've been watching your channel and enjoying it. I expect to be forcibly institutionalized, so I probably won't be back. Well, I make these videos, so maybe I'll be forcibly institutionalized as well. What's our code for that in Pennsylvania? It's, I mean, because of Van Halen, we know there's 5150 out in California. I think it's 51, it's one of the, it's still in the 5100 codes anyway. Alright, and the rest of these, I think I got a chance to answer most of them inside the comments, so hopefully I can pick any ones that I missed and pick up the tracks, because we've gone an hour and that's way too much talking. So thanks a lot for checking this out. My support links, as always, are in the video description below, now localized to several different countries. I'll give you more information on the next live stream and the initiation of that next series as soon as the parts come in and I figure out a schedule. Look for some of those other non-printing related videos coming up soon. I'm going to try, once I start getting those out, to expand my social media presence a little bit. I really don't like talking on like Twitter and Instagram and things like that, but once I get that a little bit more situated, I'll start pushing that stuff and I'll tell you where to, you know, sign up for it and things, so you don't just have pictures of like, you know, here's my pet mouse or something like that. So, until the next video, get out there and make something awesome.